College football is back, and we're back on the Big Mountain with a very special guest.
Welcome back to the mountain. I am JY. This is my good friend Steve, and we have a very special guest here to talk about the San Diego State Aztecs. I am very excited for this because as we were talking just before we got on here, one of the teams that has the most change here, head coach, players, all kinds of stuff going on. I know everybody's excited for this AztecFAST that they're going to be going on offense this year. So we have Haghverdian here. He is going to set me straight. I'm going to let him know kind of my thoughts on the Aztecs, and he knows better than I. So I'm going to be learning as all of our viewers are learning. Welcome to the Big Mountain, Andre.
Thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure. Look forward to talking Aztec football.
Yeah, and you were with, you're a writer with the East Village Times. Is that correct? Just to give our viewers a little bit about yourself, where they can find you.
Yeah, I write for the East Village Times. You can find us on eastvillagetimes.com. I also host the SDSU Podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all of those stuff. I'm on Twitter pretty extensively, so at Haghver23. It's AHAGHVER, which is most of my last name cut off, and then 23. So you can find me on any of those. We have a EVT Twitter handle. We have a SDSU Podcast Twitter handle, so you can find us on any of those.
Awesome, and I'll make sure we get some of that on the description of this video too.
Great.
So people can find you. Make sure we get people to find you on X and internets and socials and all that jazz. So let's get into the Aztecs. I think going to be a very different team than what we saw last year. So I want to start with just overall expectations. What are your expectations for the team this year? If you want to go win-loss, that's fine. But just overall, like, what are you thinking about the offense? What are you thinking about the defense? And then we'll dive into some of the players here after this.
Well, the Mountain West media picked them to finish 8th in the conference. I think the win totals in Vegas are 5.5, so that's pretty low, and it's unexpected with the way San Diego State has been over the last 10 to 15 years. I think it's because it's so much unknown. You have a brand new coaching staff. You have almost half of a roster turnover. You know, so many of the starters from last year that still had eligibility, they transferred out and went to Power 4 schools. So that caused a lot of concern from fans wondering what's going on. They brought in a bunch of guys. A lot of the guys they brought in are not from Power 4 schools. They're from group of 5 schools, FCS schools, JUCOs. So I think that the reason for those low expectations externally are because of the unknown. I think with Sean Lewis, I think the offense will do its part. They're going to play fast. They're going to play a lot of snaps. They're going to score points. You know, with San Diego State, you've gotten used to kind of playing those 20-17 games, winning ugly, winning low-scoring battles. I think you're going to see more points in the 20s and 30s. I think the key is going to be the defense. How is the defense going to respond? They've got a lot of new faces there. Can they get pressure on the quarterback? You know, up until last year, under Rocky Long and Brady Hoke, San Diego State had one of the best defenses in the country, playing the 3-3-5. Last year, they took a big step back there, and it was mainly because the defensive line was really poor. They could not stop the run. They could not get to the quarterback. That's just leaving the linebackers in the secondary really vulnerable to big plays, big runs. And now they've got a bunch of new players. They got a new defense. They play a 4-man front now instead of a 3. They've got some edge players. So expectations-wise, I expect them to win 6 to 7 games, get to a bowl game. If they can win maybe one of those 2 really, toss-up Mountain West games, maybe they can try to get in the top 2 and play in the championship game. But I think for this year, 6 to 7 wins seems reasonable to me.
So a quick follow-up on that. You talked about the media expectations. You talked about Vegas where they have them, and you gave us your expectations. What's the overall vibe around the program? I mean, as far as the fans and all that. Last year, it seemed like the fans were just done with Brady Hoke. They didn't like his style of offense. Team wasn't performing, and there was not very good vibes. So can you give us a little taste of the fan expectations and what the vibe around the program is?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Last year, as a person that covered the team, I heard it from fans, and there was a lot of anti-Brady Hoke sentiment, anti the whole defense and special teams wins games sentiment. They want points, they want touchdowns. When they lost to Nevada, 6-0 at home. Like that was probably one of the lowlights of San Diego State football in the last 30 years. And that it got loud, very loud. And it wasn't much after where we heard about Brady Hoke's retirement,
Yeah.
which, if you talk to a lot of people, it was a forced retirement, not per se his decision, but that's a whole different topic. So I think Sean Lewis coming in, an offensive-minded coach, the vibe got really good among fans. This is what they wanted. This is what they were sending emails to athletic director JD Wicker, saying what they wanted, right? And so I think that the vibes have turned around. I think a lot of fans also wanted a coach that was on social media, that was tweeting, that was energetic, and they got that. Sean Lewis is younger than I am, and I don't think I'm an old guy. And so his passion and his energy is infectious when he talks to the media. And I think fans have really loved that. Now, it hasn't really made a huge dent in season ticket sales. We'll find out in 2 weeks, about the attendance against Texas A&M Commerce. I think at the end of the day, it's winning. Putting up points and winning is what's going to draw fans. I think the diehards are happy, but I don't know if they've made the same inroads with the non-diehards in the San Diego community as they thought they might. But I think that's going to come from playing on the field and winning games starting in 2 weeks.
For sure. I mean, winning, obviously, everybody wants to win. That is number one on anyone's list. But even if you're going to lose, at least score some points. So you can go, you can have a good time, you can cheer for your team when they're scoring. And you mentioned the 0-6 loss to Nevada. I mean, and I agree with you. That was absolutely the low point. I mean, I don't like to knock Mountain West teams at all, but Nevada's just they're a struggling program right now with all the turnover that they've had. And to lose 6-0 to Nevada at home, I mean, yeah, that has to be the epitome of something has to change. People had to wake up in the AD's office or wherever, and clearly that has happened. But I also get it. Like, I'm sure someone on this point are like, hey, okay, show me. We see that you did it. You made the change, but now show us on the field, and we'll see how long that maybe takes. But definitely a different vibe. So let's talk about some of the offense. I mean, as you said, AztecFAST. I get that written to me quite often when maybe I'm talking a little bit down on the Aztecs. And I want to talk about the QB room. So we're recording this here on a Sunday, and we just learned a few hours ago that they have named their starting quarterback, freshman Danny O'Neill. And that was something I had been paying a lot of attention to. I think Duffy, at least early on, AJ Duffy got that transfer status because he was coming from FSU, and it's a Power 4, as you kind of mentioned, P4, G5 type of transfers. But I know you guys on the East Village Times have been doing reporting on this. And I've been watching that, and I'm like, I don't think this is a sure thing at all. And here we go. We've got Danny O'Neill. So I just want to get your take kind of on Danny being the starter, and also where you think AJ Duffy, the whole quarterback room, is at right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people look at a true freshman winning the battle, and that's a big surprise. But if you compare the 4 quarterbacks, they're all young. They all have almost no experience. I think in 2 years at Florida State, Duffy, I think, completed a couple passes playing mop-up duty. One of the returning San Diego State quarterbacks, Kyle Crum, I think he had played 2 games 2 years ago before he broke his collarbone, and that was because there was injuries ahead of him. So a true freshman winning the job isn't as surprising given how all 4 quarterbacks are very young and inexperienced. I think if a true freshman beat out a junior or senior that had started a ton of games wherever, that would maybe seem a little bit shocking. But I think from day one, when AJ Duffy came in, the presumptive opinion was that it was his job to lose. He was the first guy in all the reps, all the drills, starting in January through spring camp. And when he wasn't named the starter coming out of spring camp, I think that's when you kind of said, okay, well, maybe this is open, because he wanted to name a quarterback at the end of spring camp. And my colleague Paul Garrison wrote about this. Like, that's a sign that maybe he didn't separate himself enough to where the coaches felt comfortable with him. And it really did open up the competition. And then, when the depth chart came out at Media Day last month, it was an or between O'Neill and Duffy. So that opened eyes as well. And, if we sat here 2 weeks ago and you asked me, I would put a lot of money on Duffy being the starter. But things kind of started changing about 10 days ago. Two practices before the FanFest scrimmage last weekend, Duffy was no longer the one getting on the field first in drills and in scrimmages. O'Neal was. And now the practices have been mostly closed to media, so we haven't been able to be there, but other people have that we've talked to, and they were like, "Oh, O'Neal got first reps," and then at the scrimmage at FanFest, he was the first quarterback out there. So now you're talking, okay, things have shifted, and I think they had a second scrimmage 2 days ago on Friday, which was closed to fans and media. And from what I hear, O'Neal was the best quarterback at that scrimmage, which is probably why they made that decision to go with him. Duffy hadn't really separated himself. As Paul had written a few times, his arm strength is not up to par with the other guys. The problem with O'Neal, though, from what we had seen, is he's turnover prone. He's a very high risk, high reward guy. I think he has a lot of confidence in his arm and his abilities, and sometimes he makes throws that, he had 2 interceptions in the scrimmage last week that we were able to see at FanFest. So all that being said, I think O'Neal is Sean Lewis's guy, right? O'Neal was committed to Colorado when Sean Lewis was there. He decommitted the day before Sean Lewis was hired at San Diego State. Not soon after, he took a visit and committed here. So that relationship that they have is solid. And, to me, it's not surprising that Danny O'Neal won the job considering who he was battling. He's a talented guy. He was an Elite 11 finalist in high school. He's from Indianapolis. He's probably the most talented guy out of the 4. And so him winning the spot to me isn't as surprising. There's going to be some, things that he's going to have to iron out. He's going to have to fix the turnover issues. But if you ask me who the most talented quarterback I've seen from the 4, it's Danny O'Neal.
Great. I love the breakdown there. And so let's move right into the running back room. So you return a lot of your running backs from last year, but you add Cooper, who has just crazy numbers in the MAC. He was with Coach Lewis a few years ago at Kent State, 1,000-yard runner. Then over the last couple years at Ball State, again, 1,000-yard. I think he's got 3 straight 1,000-yard rush seasons. So that's only going to bolster that room. I actually picked Cooper. We did kind of a fun little topic here where we picked the most interesting player on every team, I guess it was, non-quarterback. And I picked Cooper because I think this kid could be somewhat of a game changer-ish if he's able to break some of those runs. So can you talk about the room in general and the addition of Cooper here to the room for the Aztecs?
Yeah, most of the room was actually Cooper came in after spring. So they didn't bring any transfers in after the season ended before spring, which I think turned some heads because if you look at those running backs that returned, they were all inconsistent.
Yeah.
Struggled. The running game was really poor the last 2 seasons. There was a lot of question about was it the offensive line, was it the running backs, was it the play calling? Well, 3 of the offensive linemen went to Power 5 schools or Power 4 schools in the transfer portal. So obviously those schools thought those guys were good to be starters on their team, right? Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot of questions about, are these running backs, who's a number 1 running back on that? Are they a bunch of number 2s or can anyone be a number 1? And I think Marquez Cooper fills that bill for number 1. He's a leading active rusher in FBS. So all those 1,000-yard seasons has kind of kept him, he's at the top of the active rushing leader, and he's done it under Sean Lewis. So having him in that offense, a familiarity with that offense, I agree. I think if Ashton Jeanty wasn't in the conference, you would think Marquez Cooper could be number 1 running back in that conference. He's that good. I mean, we only saw 3 carries at FanFest. He had 32 yards. He only played 1 drive, and he constantly made guys miss in the hole on all 3 snaps. And then they were like, okay, we've seen enough. You're good. Go sit on the sideline. And that's something they lacked. Those other running backs didn't have the vision or the make guys miss that Cooper showed in just 3 carries. And I totally agree. I think Cooper is going to have a big season in an offense he's already had big seasons in.
Sure. Yeah.
10 yards a carry is pretty good.
Yeah. Let's flip to the other side real quick here. Defense, and you mentioned this kind of in when we were talking just about overall expectations. The change, obviously Brady Hoke was a defensive kind of guy and all that kind of stuff. And the big change really going from that 3-3-5 to the 4-2-5. They do have 4 returning starters from last year, which is pretty low for any team to have 4. And you mentioned about the transfers and things like that. Where do you think the defense is going to be at? I mean, clearly that's what, as you mentioned, that's what Brady Hoke would hang his hat on, and we got to be defense first, yada, yada, yada. So I would think at the very least there'd be some sort of a step back just because of the transfers, because of the change in methodology and head coaches and things. But where exactly do you think they're going to be at this year?
Yeah, one of the big question marks is when you have an offense that plays fast and moves fast and gets the ball, whether they score quick or they go 3 and out quick.
Yeah,
that means the defense is going to be on the field more, and they're going to be more tired, and they're going to give up plays. So that's something we don't know yet how that's going to pan out. But I think that the secondary strength, they've got really good corners and safeties. But the front 6 is almost all brand new except for one guy, Tupu Alualu, who had a really good last year after a JUCO transfer. But I think the key is going to be their edges. Which one of their edges can step up? They can get pressure on the quarterback. They can play the run. That was a huge problem last year. They brought in a ton of guys from the FBS level, FCS level. One guy from Illinois, Jared Beatty, who didn't really play much, but they're hoping he can contribute. Marlon Lewis from Richmond, Ezekiel Larry from Yale. These are all guys that they're hoping to contribute and be those guys that they're missing last year. But I do think it's a step back because it's a brand new system.
Yeah.
They're probably going to have more plays on the field. So, they could, in some crazy way, they can give up more points than last year's defense did and maybe still be a better defense because maybe they get more sacks or they get more turnovers and they impact the game differently than just giving up points. So that's the biggest wild card. In that whole win total I gave, I think the curve is going to be based on how well the defense plays and how quickly they get up to speed.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you had them, you said early on, around a 500 season, 6-7 wins ish. For those that saw my preview, unfortunately, I wasn't quite that high on the win total for the Aztecs. I actually had them at a 4-8 season again. And I know some people have told me that, JY, you're not accurate at all. You got to get somebody on that knows what they're talking about because you don't know what you're talking about. So I hope for you and for the fans of the Aztecs, you are correct, and they're right around that 500 or better season, maybe sniffing a championship depending on how the season goes. Not championship, but trying to get to the game, or at least in discussions of getting into the game. Because I said, I mean, with the way the schedule is here, you only have 7 conference games. Yeah. So the likelihood of us having some sort of a 2-3-way tie again this year, I think, unfortunately, is somewhat high because of some of the better teams just not playing each other. So you're not going to be able to knock each other out, so to speak. So absolutely, I mean, if the offense here, what you talked about, this AztecFAST, can really get things going, O'Neal, again, like you said, maybe make some mistakes. Any freshman quarterback is going to do that. And the defense can hold their own. Maybe the surprise of the Mountain West this year could be the Aztecs. I don't know. We'll see. So any final thoughts on Coach Lewis, AztecFAST, anything like that maybe I didn't hit?
Yeah, I think they have a really good schedule. They get Washington State and Oregon State at home. They played Oregon State last year at Corvallis, and they actually played it competitively until the end of the game when Oregon State kind of separated themselves. They get Washington State. I do think some of those, at Boise and at UNLV are going to be their 2 toughest games of the season.
Yeah.
And that they pretty much want to maybe take care of business on all those other games and not rely on having to win one of those 2 games. But it's from how last season started and how this season is about to start, it is a huge change in just culture and an Aztec way, AztecFAST, obviously, as we've talked about. I'm just curious to see how the fan base kind of is galvanized by that, because as we talked about, we haven't really seen the season ticket sales grow. But I think putting up points, what I heard a lot from fans last year is that some of them said they would rather lose 38-35 than win 10-7.
Sure.
Right. They may get their wish this year. And so We'll see how the fans react to that, because I think there was a big emphasis on finding an offensive-minded coach to replace Brady Hoke, and now they've got it, and that's what the fans said they wanted. So I'm going to be curious if the success on the field will translate to how the fans respond to it.
Yeah.
Hey, quick follow-up question for you. We talked about the quarterback situation. We talked about the running back situation, and both of those actually sound really exciting. And I was a big unknown. And after hearing what you said, I'm really interested in seeing those two positions. Is there is there another player that you're watching that maybe we're out here on the East Coast that the national media and national college football fan base is not aware of? Maybe a perimeter player on offense, or even a special player in the secondary, someone that we should just know that name and look for that player. Is there anyone else that you want to talk about?
On offense, the guy that I would circle is Lewis Brown the fourth. He's a transfer from Colorado State, so he's a guy. He's actually the guy who had a big day against Colorado last year in that big late night game that went to triple overtime, or it was like one of the best games of the year.
Yeah.
And he had a big game. He scored a couple touchdowns. He's a tall, fast receiver. He kind of is almost like the perfectly built receiver. Unfortunately, he missed the last two scrimmages because he's been a little dinged up, but he's supposed to be ready. I think he could be in for a big season on the outside from a receiving standpoint. On the defensive side, I'll name two guys. One's Trey White. He's an edge guy. He played outside linebacker in the 3-3-5, but now he's kind of moved into that fourth lineman on the edge, what he played in high school. He's a local San Diego kid. Coaches have really been talking about how his development over spring and now fall camp. So he could be one of those guys that I was talking about from the edge perspective that could wreak havoc. And then Chris Johnson, he's a corner. He's the only corner that's kind of returning from the rotation last year. But he played as a true freshman. He's a really talented guy. He had an interception at the scrimmage. I think those two guys on defense could be in for a big day, big season.
Awesome.
Great. Appreciate that. And you mentioned the out of conference schedule. I can tell you I think for the Aztecs and the Spartans, San Jose State, I think you both have the hardest in conference schedules, bar none. You mentioned you're at UNLV, you're at Boise, you're also at Wyoming. Nobody likes to travel to that elevation. Doesn't matter how good of a team you have. And then you also you play Air Force. And Hawaii, who I think Hawaii is going to have a pretty solid team here as well. So the Mountain West schedulers did not do the Aztecs any favors this year. But hey, it's a great test for this offense. I mean, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best, as they say. So, Andre, hey, we really appreciate you coming on. I know I appreciated learning more about the Aztecs. I'm happy to hear that they've named their quarterback, freshman O'Neal. Anxious for this season in this AztecFAST. I try to watch as many Mountain West games as I can, and I'll certainly be turning in to watch the Aztecs. So we appreciate you coming on, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with that, hey, we thank you guys for watching. Make sure you give this one a like. Subscribe if you like our content. The season's only 1 week away, for crying out loud. We're ready to get to some football. We'll see you guys next time on the Big Mountain.